designing the cybersecurity systems, and we also specialise in data science. My talk today is aimed at moving towards an understanding of how organisations can adapt to evolving threats to privacy in Australia. In the early part of the 21st century, individuals' lives are increasingly becoming intertwined with interactions in the digital world, which is becoming a ubiquitous part of the fabric of life. Whether it's online shopping, social media, online banking, news, entertainment, joining up to organisations' websites, loyalty programs, ordering food, and online education. Amidst this technological revolution affecting the lives of all of us, protecting individual privacy is becoming a major policy issue around the world. There are constant news headlines on cybersecurity breaches, many of which involve violations of individual privacy. So today I would like to discuss why privacy is important for organisations in Australia, what challenges have been identified that companies can face in implementing privacy safeguards into their organisations. Then I'd like to look at how enterprises have successfully navigated the problem of implementing privacy controls and measures in other parts of the world. Hopefully, we can then move towards an understanding of how Australian companies can be informed by some of these best practices. Recently, high-profile and damaging cyber attacks in Australia comprise of individuals' personal information being compromised within telecommunications, health insurance, and consumer finance, just to name a few, have put into the spotlight the urgent need for countermeasures to safeguard individual privacy from cyber attacks. It's public knowledge that the data of 10 million Medibank customers was stolen in a cyber attack. These cases are just the tip of the iceberg, as many of you are aware, in terms of the number of cyber security violations that are occurring across organisations in Australia. More recently, a spokesperson for a prominent hospital in Parkville revealed that cyber criminals accessed the private email accounts, which created a data leak of more than 190 patients. Recently, the social media company TikTok was fined €345 million by European Union regulators for the violation of the privacy of 13 to 17-year-old children due to their data collection practices. So this raises the question, what sort of world do we want to live in? As technology becomes more and more integrated into our lives, what human rights and values do we want to uphold? What sort of world do we want to leave our children? One framework for privacy protection is informational self-determination, and the claim of individuals to determine for themselves when, how, and to what extent information about them is communicated to others. This is a rights-based definition of privacy. However, there is no single definition. Actually, privacy has had a long and interesting history in philosophy and law. This can inform IT professionals how they can think about privacy and its interactions with technology. There are various standards that provide a good framework for understanding principles of privacy. The Fair Information Practice Principles, which has been used as a guide for business in the United States. Also, there is the Guideline on the Protection of Privacy and Transporter Flows of Personal Data, published by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. And there's the Privacy Framework by APEC. But it's also an ethical issue. And actually, there's an organisation called the Governance Institute of Australia. In their 2023 Ethics Index, which is an annual nationwide survey that examined perceptions of ethical issues and conduct within Australian society, And the survey provides a snapshot of what Australians believe to be the most and least ethical occupations, organisations and sectors, as well as the top ethical challenges of the future. While the rising cost of living and impact on inflation is ranked at the top of ethical challenges, cybersecurity breaches and privacy protection was the second most important ethical challenge that we face as a nation, according to this international survey. So while privacy protection is perceived to be an important ethical issue by many Australians, privacy data breach can also result in brand damage, the loss of customer trust, the risk of potential class actions against organisations, as we have seen in Australia in the last 12 months, and there are clear financial costs. IBM Security sponsored a study in 2022, the cost of a data breach report, which studied 550 organisations which were impacted by data breaches in 17 countries and 17 different industries. And these data breaches occurred between March 2021 and March 2022. And this study was concerned with all different types of data breaches, not just personal information. However, these are some of the relevant findings from this research sponsored by IBM Security. 60% of organisations' breaches lead to increased prices passed on to customers. The average cost of a data breach was 4.35 million US. The average cost of ransomware attack, 4.54 million. The average cost of critical infrastructure data breach was 4.82 million US. Whereas the findings also concluded that the average cost saving associated with the fully deployed security AI automation was just over $3 million. And companies with fully deployed AI and automation experience on average 74-day shorter time to identify and contain the breach than those without security AI and automation. And cybersecurity is a constant challenge of adapting to emerging technologies and increasingly advanced threat actors, and the rate of change is accelerating. Our adversaries are not only individuals, but also highly sophisticated organisations which are increasingly using capabilities with artificial intelligence. The scope of privacy threats is growing, and subsequently, small and medium-sized enterprises must face these risks as much as government organisations and large enterprises. Therefore, it's important for organisations of all sizes to be aware of technology trends over the next few years, to be most adaptive to the evolving sophistication to cyber attacks, which can lead to the violation of individuals' privacy. There are some trends. First, increasingly, we have large data sets of personal information which are accessed via remote work and mobile platforms. And this provides a perfect storm of potential risks for cyber threat actors to infiltrate and breach private and confidential information. Second trend that is emerging in Australia and in many other countries is a constantly changing regulatory environment. This requires the development of skills in relation to privacy concerns and an ability to interpret privacy principles and evolving laws and translate and integrate them into existing business processes, risk and audit systems, and engineering life cycles. The federal government has released its long-awaited report of the Attorney General's Department review of the Privacy Act in 1988. According to the Attorney General, the proposed reforms are aimed at strengthening the protection of personal information and the control individuals have over their information, and ensuring the Privacy Act is fit for purpose in the digital age. Another key intention of the reforms is to make it more closely aligned with the Privacy Act, or more closely align the Privacy Act with its equivalent overseas laws, including the General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union and the UK. Reforming Australia's privacy framework will complement other reforms being progressed by the government, including the Australian Cybersecurity Strategy, Digital ID, the National Strategy for Identity Resilience, and supporting responsible AI in Australia. All these initiatives recognise the importance of government working with stakeholders on reforms which will assist entities to manage risks appropriately and enable Australians to safely and securely engage in the digital economy. Recently, in a speech to the Australian Financial Review Cyber Summit, the chair of ASIC said, if boards do not give cybersecurity and cyber resilience sufficient priority, this creates a foreseeable risk of harm to the company and thereby exposes the directors to potential enforcement action by ASIC based on the directors not acting with reasonable care and diligence. And obviously, there are certain reporting obligations, such as I've listed in this slide. However, what's really interesting is, apart from these reporting requirements, which are not sufficient, this is a problem that ASIC has determined. ASIC has done research which has shown that there's often a disconnect between a company's board's oversight of cyber risk, management reporting to the board, how it's reported, and the identification and assessment of risks and how controls are actually implemented in the organisation. So according to the chairman of ASIC, Joe Longo, this disconnect must be addressed if the board wants to meet its legal obligations and avoid further harmful ramifications of a privacy breach. So this is a basic problem statement that's been identified by research done by ASIC. It's not my own research. So I'd like to really now ask the question, what can enterprises do to ensure that they can successfully bridge the gap between governance reporting and how controls are implemented? What are the ways in which the core privacy principles can be operationalised to ensure that they are fit for purpose through all business systems and technology of an organisation? This led me to think, what can we learn from enterprises in other parts of the world which have successfully navigated operationalising privacy laws and safeguards? What I discovered in my research was that there are some academics who've already found the answer to these questions. Academics Bamberger and Mulligan from Berkeley Center for Law and Technology conducted research in 9 enterprises. They conducted research in various enterprises in the United States, 9 enterprises in the United States, 9 in Germany, 12 in France, 12 in Spain, and 11 in the United Kingdom. And their research was qualitative, structured interviews conducted with 53 privacy professionals from these various organisations. And the conclusion of their case studies was that enterprises in Germany and the United States were the most successful and adept at implementing privacy concerns and safeguards into the organisations. What set apart enterprises in Germany and the United States in this study was that the level of privacy function was high and deeply integrated into their decision-making structures, technologies and processes. These organisations had personnel at various levels of the organisation who were highly trained in and concerned with privacy principles and controls. So I'd like to now turn to the main competencies that these organisations, which made them so successful in implementing safeguards and addressing the problem identified by the chairman of ASIC. Despite the variations in corporate culture, structure, different national understandings about the meaning of privacy, and despite the fact that Germany and the United States have radically different legal obligations, in particular, these enterprises demonstrated a combination of competencies which made up best practices in these leading US and German enterprises. These best practices include: 1, privacy concerns making the board's agenda. 2nd, boundary spanning chief privacy officer. A prominent privacy lead who mediates between external privacy demands in terms of law and compliance and internal corporate practices. 3, effective implementation of privacy controls. This means the integration of privacy decisions into technology design and existing business processes. These controls were operationalized within these companies by a distribution of privacy expertise within business units and the assignment of specialized staff to data-intensive processes and systems. Whereas these combinations of competencies and systems were not present in the organizations according to the accounts of privacy leads that were interviewed in Spain, France, and the United Kingdom. As I mentioned, ASIC's research has shown that there is often a disconnect between a company's board oversight of cyber risk, the management reporting function on this topic to the board, as well as the identification and assessment of risks and how controls are implemented. And the other issue is that privacy protection generally does not drive profitability in companies. Whereas in the various enterprises in the United States and Germany, which were superior, which were leaders and exercising best practice, the first lesson learned is that privacy was acknowledged as a challenge and its protection as a corporate priority. So as such, the boards of these organisations gave a high level of attention, resources, and prominence was given to the privacy function within the organisation. The chief privacy officers were often given access to corporate boards and bring privacy concerns to the attention of high-level decision makers. Boundary spanning chief privacy officer. What this means is the chief privacy officers in these leading organisations routinely engage with external stakeholders. As such, they're able to bring outside perspectives and interpretations on evolving privacy norms, which can inform decision making. This is important because of the evolving nature of privacy laws and compliance obligations. This increases the reliance of organisations on the privacy officer to interpret and translate outside developments and perspectives. And this includes issues of legality, market pressure, etc. This engagement with a variety of external stakeholders and diverse privacy professionals is particularly important because it gives credibility to the privacy officer at the board level and influence in corporate decisions. And it also allows the privacy officer to collaborate and negotiate to maintain privacy as a priority in the face of a corporate culture that is often primarily focused on efficiency and profit. Effective implementation of privacy controls into their organisations. This occurred in these organisations through several means. Number one, privacy controls were incorporated into existing risk management and audit systems. This ensures that privacy is leveraging existing processes and resources. Number two, Senior business unit executives are given responsibility to develop and implement plans which embed privacy measures into the organisational processes. And also the Chief Privacy Officer has influence on high-level decision-making and participates with executives in strategic settings. 3, there's an emphasis on embedding staff with privacy protection expertise into all the business units. And this is important in embedding privacy controls in large, decentralised organisations. 4, there's routine privacy training and decision tools provided to employees to assist them in making right choices in their design decisions, processes, and information flows. And finally, these organisations employed a privacy by design approach in building new systems. This is the next topic I would like to briefly examine in the following few slides. Am I going for time? So far I've been talking about strategies that firms in Germany and the United States which have been successful in integrating privacy safeguards and practices into their organisations. Now I'd like to talk about a privacy by design approach. A privacy by design methodology is building processes, products and services that embed privacy principles within the design as a requirement. A privacy by design approach should include privacy impact assessments, decision-making tools, asset registers, and process audits to ensure that processes and decisions incorporate privacy from the beginning. Privacy engineering has 3 broad areas. First of all, data governance. Data governance requires stakeholders across the organisation to create a common taxonomy for data to be tracked and managed. This requires knowing the business objectives, knowing law and policies, and implementing appropriate technology to safeguard data. Second, technology controls to safeguard privacy need to be implemented. They can broadly be categorised under the following areas: access controls, data flow controls, and retention control points. Third, the privacy needs to be embedded at all stages in the development lifecycle or engineering lifecycle. Unlike cybersecurity threats, in general, privacy has its own classification system of threats and harms. IT developers use threat modelling to identify risks to the system based on concrete scenarios. Threat modelling consists of negative outcomes enabled by a particular threat agent or type of agent. And why this analysis has grown out of security engineering, the same techniques may be used to anticipate potential privacy harms, such as Daniel Solov's harms classification. Threat modelling should be a part of a design process which should lead to controls, which are countermeasures to reduce privacy risks. Threat modelling can inform privacy requirements as countermeasures to these potential harms and violations of privacy. There are numerous methods and safeguards against potential privacy violations. In general, we can broadly think of them as process-oriented strategies and data-oriented strategies, but there are others. There's Hoagman's 26 tactics. There are other ways of classifying it, but to keep it simple, what do these consist of? Okay. Privacy-oriented strategies can focus on enforce, demonstrate, inform, control. What that means is enforce means enforcing policy and processes. Enterprises need to develop internal policies that describe how the organisation intends to manage personal information and ensure that employers are adhering to these policies. Processes could include specific tactics such as tokenization or cryptography. Organisations need to maintain these policies to ensure that they are consistent throughout the organisation for all stakeholder groups, employees and customers. Demonstrating compliance. An enterprise can demonstrate compliance to regulators, that is, processing personal information according to its established policies and procedures by, firstly, log, track all processes of data which allow for reviewing any anomaly that may present a risk. Audit, perform regular audits to ensure that the perform regular audits to ensure that logging and other organisational activities are following established processes. This provides visibility. And report. Produce a report on a periodic basis to include results for logs, audits and tests, and report back to employees who are responsible for policy and process implementation. Inform. Inform means informing the individual. Every enterprise is required to inform customers about the processing of their information by providing a privacy notice. Individuals should be notified about what personal information is being used, what the organisational policies are for processing the personal information, and the potential risks. Privacy notices should be concise and understandable. And finally, control. User control. Giving individuals control over their personal information provides a more balanced relationship between the organisation and the individual. And that can include consent, such that the organisation only processes the personal information which has been given on the basis of explicit and informed consent. Choice. Choice means the individual can select or exclude personal information that has been processed. And finally, companies provide the individual the right to have their personal information removed if requested. So a privacy by design approach can be split up and thought about in terms of its architecture. The objective of privacy compliant architecture is to reduce the identifiability of data and decentralized operations. A privacy by architecture approach uses pseudonymous and anonymous data and push data into a more user-centric architecture. Security, once a high-level architecture has been settled on, data domains can be secured through abstraction and hide strategies. Supervision, that has to do with enforcing privacy policies through various processes. And balance, as I mentioned before, the strategies to inform and control, to reduce the imbalances of information and power. Privacy technologists need to consider the costs and benefits of whether the collection and processing of private information is legitimate, appropriate, and adequate. So as well as in any design process, there's a requirements gathering process, and we can think of the need to develop privacy requirements based on threat modelling, a threat modelling framework, understand how to address, but as well as the threat modelling framework, you can also address privacy quality characteristics. And that's also useful in a design phase, and these are non-functional characteristics, which are things such as predictability, manageability, disassociability, identification, network centricity, confidentiality, availability, integrity, and mobility. And the extent to which the engineers want to measure and aim for each of those, which are all on a continuum. They're not absolute values, but more, there has to be a kind of reasonable assurance, and it has to be done in a practical way because there are no absolutes. So in a privacy by design approach, it can be used to draw upon design patterns. Privacy design patterns. Traditionally, design patterns have been used in software development to improve the efficiency in a software development program or project. However, there are now privacy design patterns that address various problems. They are design solutions to common privacy problems. The University of California, Berkeley School of Information has created an open source of privacy design patterns, a collection of many different types of design solutions for unique contextual problems that, depending on what type of technology, whether it be an e-commerce system or whatever it is. So for example, if you go to their website, as you notice in the previous slide, they have these different categories which represent the different types of strategies, data or process strategies. If you click on one of those categories, they provide pre-canned design patterns that developers and privacy specialists can use to solve problems based on a particular context for whatever it is that people are building. So in this discussion, I've been attempting to move towards a better understanding of lessons learned from best practices in enterprises from the Northern Hemisphere based on case studies of enterprises in various countries. And this was based on research that was conducted by academics at Berkeley Center of Law and Technology. And if, as IT professionals, we want to make a small contribution to making the world a safer place, embed privacy as a social value into our organisations, avoid potential harms of privacy violations, then we can potentially learn a great deal from organisations which have excelled in other parts of the world. These case studies were limited to 5 countries, and 53 case studies in total may not be statistically significant. But the competencies and organising principles that these organisations use to implement privacy into the organisation seem to make practical sense. If organisations wish to heed the advice from the chairman of ASIC, what can organisations do to bridge the gap between governance reporting and how controls are implemented? So hopefully this is like a call to action to companies from different shape and form, size and complexity, a call to action possibly to address the concerns of the chairman of ASIC and learn from, at least move towards an understanding to address some of these problems. Thank you.
Open to a few questions if anyone's got anything you'd like clarified. I've probably got one. I sort of come to that, that statement, seek first, understand, and then be understood. And it's really interesting, that statement by the ASIC chief about a gap between the layers in a business understanding these controls. And the words privacy by design always gets thrown on the table, a bit like secure by design. It's sort of a very overused term, and it's been great to sort of see you break it down. How do you get an organisation to embrace some of that, to get it to sort of be taken up? Because, that sort of has to exist in so many layers in the organisation these days. Do you have any examples of how that could be implemented or taken up?
I think one of the main observations or lessons learned from these companies, and it was a small sample size, this is only 5 countries around the world, but these organisations appear to be able to not only have an influential chief privacy officer who's able to influence corporate level decision making, but also they expect the business unit executives to implement plans and processes and have direct lines of reporting, and then embed highly skilled privacy specialists throughout different layers of the organisation, embed privacy into existing audit and risk processes, and have regular training, all of those things, because I've spoken to general counsel of a major organisation who said it's a problem. He's explained this to me, and I've spoken to another general counsel for a superannuation company, and she told me that best practice is really important, because you imagine how important privacy is for a superannuation company, and that's her main concern, privacy. And so it's a big deal that, you know, there are big teams of legal people, but it's one thing to be able to report, but risk management reporting is not enough. Things get slipped through the gap. There's a lot of scale and complexity in large organisations. Huge amount of scale and complexity. There are many assets. Have to have an asset register. So it's not a simple thing just to implement it, and it can be glossed over when it goes to the board level.
Yeah, look, I think with the coming legislative changes, this area is only going to get more complicated, more critical for businesses of all ilk, government and business, and so the age of the privacy officer and probably privacy by design is going to be a mandatory requirement for a lot of places. So Rob, thank you very much for sharing your great knowledge, and we really appreciate it. So again, thank you.